Tell me, do you know what makes someone righteous? Some would say it's being true to oneself, but is that not selfish? The other side of that coin would say it is to sacrifice, but does that mean one can only have glory in death? Unfortunately, this is one of those questions that doesn't have a solid answer. Many cultures over many eras have asked these questions, and many more still have argued to this day what it means to walk the path of the righteous. While I may not be able to give you the answer to these questions, I can tell you the story of a man whose courage failed him one day, and it only cost him a life of dishonor. I am the Synodic Scribe, and today we shall delve into the dungeon of Cutter's Cry. To truly appreciate the story of Cutter's Cry, we must first understand a once famous mercenary band called the Darklight Raiders. These individuals were not adventurers as we know them as, since they existed before the creation of the Adventurers Guild. Before the Adventurers Guild, if you wished to do something like become an adventurer, you would usually have to join a mercenary group of some kind. These groups would then be hired by a company or city-state to take care of various problems. From defeating monsters, fighting back infestations, or assisting in magical investigations, these mercenaries were expected to be talented for what they were being paid. And one of the greatest groups at this time were the Darklight Raiders. The Raiders were comprised of 7 individuals that each possessed particular skills. The leader of the Darklight Raiders was a man named Sibold the Red. His second in command was Aubriest Stillwater, with the rest of their band being Simon the Sweet, Shiren Zabron, Thormone Thousandgill, One Ale Malison, and Sibold the Stoic. However, only one of these individuals are of interest now, as unfortunately the other 6 died during their raid of Cutter's Cry. Sibold the Stoic is the last and only surviving member of the Darklight Raiders and is currently living within Ul'dah. Though if you ask him, he may admit that he feels like he should have died that day alongside his comrades. But why didn't he? By his own confession, Sibold declared that it was his own cowardice that ultimately spared his life. The Darklight Raiders were hired to deal with a monster within Cutter's Cry and clear it out. But eventually, this would mean doing battle with an unnatural monstrosity. A chimera had taken residence inside these caves. You see, most caravans coming through northern Thanalan those days did so because of the boom in lumber trade at the time. However, everyone knew to avoid the caves that made up Cutter's Cry because of the gruesome monsters that had taken up residence in the deeper tunnels. But no one could have guessed just how dangerous the chimera truly was. To be fair, the Darklight Raiders had every reason to confidently storm the tunnels. They'd taken dozens of jobs and never suffered a single fatality. They even cleared out monsters within the Aurum Vale without consequence. But this fight caught them off guard, and it would cost them everything. Their battle with the Chimera quickly turned in the monster's favor, as they did not know or understand its strange and varied abilities. One by one, the Darklight Raiders began to fall. And the only reason Sibold survived was because he decided to hide under the mutilated body of his leader, Sibold. As he laid there beneath the now warm corpse of his friend, he could hear his remaining allies yelling and screaming for help. Eventually, their frenzied shrieking would cease as he remained motionless beneath Sibold's bleeding body. Sibold could hear the chimera feasting on the remains of his friends, and only dared to move once the beast had had its fill and moved deeper into the caves. As the only surviving member of the Darklight Raiders, he could have said anything. He could have lied, weaving a tale that his friends valiantly sacrificed themselves so that he might escape. But Sibold was never that kind of man. The guilt of hiding as his friends died was too heavy a weight to bear, as he would eventually confess the truth of what happened in those caves. Many people called him a craven and coward, that he should have died with them if he ever truly considered himself their friend, and a part of Sibold would always agree with that. He never once said he was anything more than a mad fool for hiding under his friend and leader that day. But why did he do it? Well, at the time, Sibold recently married, and his wife was pregnant. When the Chimera began butchering the Darklight Raiders, and it was clear they wouldn't win, all Sibold could think about was how he'd never get the chance to hold his newborn child, how he'd leave his wife as a widow. So he chose to hide. He survived and ultimately got what he wanted: a family. But the guilt of giving up during that fight has haunted him to this day. The best he has done is try to leave flowers outside the entrance to Cutter's Cry every year, praying that one day his friends might forgive him. Thus was the end of the Darklight Raiders, a grim warning of the dangers lurking within these tunnels, and a definitive reminder that the life of an adventurer is always more dangerous than you'd expect. So, with all that being said, what of the dungeon itself? And why was this the final resting place of the Darklight Raiders? Let's begin with how Cutter's Cry was formed in the first place. This location is a lot to take in at first glance, as it's ultimately a series of natural caves that are filled to the brim with various creatures, with the most popular entrance actually being a massive antling tunnel. Anyone entering these caves from the entrance will soon discover just how many Vilekin have made these tunnels their home. In fact, there's so many antlings and worms here that many people believe that the natural fauna are just as responsible for creating this cave network as weathering and erosion. But honestly, you can't blame these tunnels for becoming a hotspot for monsters, as Cutter's Cry is actually home to more than one oasis. Since fresh water isn't overly abundant in the dry climes of Thanalan, it's only natural that the creatures would be drawn to this location. However, on top of containing these places of respite, the deeper tunnels of this dungeon are actually home to ceruleum deposits. For those unaware or haven't sat in on my lessons involving Garlemald and Magitech, ceruleum is the naturally occurring blue liquid that almost all Magitech devices use as their primary energy source. Even on its own, ceruleum is a highly volatile substance, and it doesn't take much to get this fluid to ignite higher and hotter than oil. In fact, Cutter's Cry is already home to a few ceruleum-based fire hazards. Likely caused to ignite by a monster, these flames will usually burn until the entire deposit it's connected to is spent or becomes out of reach. Anyone venturing into the deeper recesses of these tunnels would be wise to avoid inhaling too much of these fumes. Also, given how deep the ceruleum deposits are in this place, it's unlikely any companies from Ul'dah will try to tap and excavate this resource anytime soon, especially with the amount of monsters between them and this bluish fuel. But past the ceruleum deposits and earthy monsters, we come upon the Chimera's lair. This location has plenty of evidence suggesting it wasn't only the Darklight Raiders that met their end here. More than likely, it was some adventurers or other mercenaries trying to claim glory and one-up the now-deceased band, only to meet the same fate. But unlike the Darklight Raiders, I don't know who these individuals were. But what about this monstrosity has made it so dangerous? Why did even a seasoned and tested group of mercenaries suffer such a vicious fate? The answer to that question stretches back to the Third Astral Era, during the height of the Allagan Empire. I'll save a deeper lesson on the creation and powers of Allag's various chimeras for another day. But know this, it was the creation and use of chimeras that eventually killed Dawn Wyrm Bahamut, the original one, not the primal. Which means the chimeras were designed specifically to be stronger and worse than dragons. When you take that knowledge into consideration, it's not unreasonable to see how the common man fares no chance against such a beast, as most mortal men wouldn't dream of conquering a dragon in the first place. Simply put, without already knowing the varied powers of a chimera, the Darklight Raiders had little to no chance of surviving in the first place. But thankfully, the chimera of Cutter's Cry seems to be a first-generation chimera, as it never seemed to produce any offspring despite its decades of seclusion. So don't be intimidated by the egg-like objects littering its lair, as all first-generation chimeras are infertile, and the only means of making more would have been Allagan cloning technology. Although, despite this monster's might, members of the Adventurers Guild would eventually grow bold enough to venture into Cutter's Cry and finally put an end to the chimera's carnage. While it did not ease the guilt of Sibold the Stoic, it did bring him some measure of peace knowing that the murderer of his friends was finally slain. While many have called Sibold a coward, I cannot bring myself to say so. As a collector of lore both new and old, I've come to carry countless lives as well as the stories they've created. And if there's any common theme between them, it's that most people will do anything to save themselves. Whether it be man, monster, or even a void scent, living creatures instinctively choose to run, hide, and survive when faced with a force they cannot overcome. It takes a strong will to face one's impending demise unflinching, a test that's made even harder when you've more than just your life to lose, just like Sibold. So my friends, while it's easy to boast about what you may or may not have done in his situation, know that your true colors will only reveal themselves on the razor's edge, and never a moment sooner. Speak not of what you will do during these moments, and instead, silently show the world what you're made of through action alone. And if you carry one of the Raider's weapons, then you yourself hold the legacy of one of the most famous mercenary bands of the Sixth Astral Era. But that will be all from me for now, and all I ask is that you meditate on this story the next time you're traveling through Central Thanalan. So, until next we meet, stay safe my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and share this with your fellow adventurers? With your help, I'll try to reach out even further and bring even greater stories to you. Although, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Rovakis, Potato, Burn My Pancakes, The Yellow Couch, Papaya Cyan, Sage Mouse, Volvalis Oma, Cizane, Azeri, Niel, and Cat, with an additional nod to the scholarships on screen. Links to things like my Twitter and that of my channel artist Caddy can be found in the description. Thank you all for your viewership as well as your support, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Class dismissed.